United Nations Peacekeeping, 1989 to 2005, by Sanderson Beck. The United Nations was powerless to mediate the conflicts in Central America until the Cold War declined in the late 1980s. In August 1989, Nicaragua's Sandinista government agreed to conditions for national elections in exchange for demobilization of the Contra rebels. The United Nations Observer Group in Central America, ONUCA, was established on November 7th. Honduras and the other Central American countries also wanted the Contras demobilized. And on April 19, 1990, they signed the Managua Agreements. Contras surrendered their weapons, uniforms, and ammunition to the ONUCA and received a demobilization certificate, designer jeans and a shirt, and a food ration from an organization co-sponsored by the United Nations and the Organization of American States, OAS. By June, 22,000 Contras had been demobilized, and the UN security zones were abolished. On July 26, 1990, the government of El Salvador and the resistance group Frente Farabundo Martí para la Liberación Nacional, FMLN, signed the Agreement on Human Rights at San Jose, Costa Rica. And on April 27, 1991, both sides signed an agreement for constitutional reforms to be presented in the Legislative Assembly of El Salvador. The United Nations Observer Mission in El Salvador, ONUSAL, began its work on July 26, and on January 16, 1992, the two sides signed a peace agreement at Chapultepec Castle in Mexico City. ONUSAL supervised the elections of March and April 1994. After 36 years of conflict, a Guatemala peace agreement was finally signed in December 1996, and the United Nations Verification Mission in Guatemala, MINUGUA, verified the Human Rights Agreement and the ceasefire as the Unidad Revolucionario Nacional Guatemalteca, URNG. Combatants were demobilized. During World War I, South Africa occupied the German colony of Southwest Africa and was given the League mandate over it. But after World War II, South Africa refused to accept UN authority and tried to annex the territory. Efforts began for independence, but the United Nations did not revoke South Africa's mandate until 1966. And 5 years later, the International Court of Justice ruled that South Africa's occupation was illegal. After the Caetano regime of Portugal fell in 1974, its former colonies became independent as Angola and Mozambique, with Marxist governments. A civil war broke out in Angola the next year as Portugal withdrew. The government was supported militarily by Cuba and the Soviet Union, while the United States and South Africa aided rebel groups. Meanwhile, South Africa tried and failed to impose a non-Marxist apartheid government in Namibia, Southwest Africa. In 1976, the 5 Western nations of Canada, France, Britain, United States, and West Germany formed the Contact Group to negotiate a settlement that was proposed to the UN Security Council 2 years later. Although the Council adopted the plan in a resolution that year, more than a decade of negotiation passed before the United Nations Transition Assistance Group, UNTAG, was implemented in April 1989. Elections were held in independent Namibia on November 1st, and a week later, half of Cuba's 50,000 troops had left, with those remaining north of the 13th parallel. The United Nations Angola Verification Mission, UNAVEM, also began with the signing of peace accords by South Africa, Angola, and Cuba on December 22, 1988, and its mission ended when the last Cuban troops were withdrawn 2 months early in May 1991. UNAVEM-2 was deployed the next month and was to last until November 1992, but it was extended. In Mozambique, President Chissano, who was elected in 1986, and Afonso Dalla Cama signed the General Peace Agreement in Rome on October 4, 1992, and the United Nations operation in Mozambique, ONU-MOZ, began monitoring it in 1993. Elections were held in Mozambique the next year and were declared free and fair by ONU-MOZ, which left Mozambique before the end of 1994. In Angola, signing of the Lusaka Protocol on November 20, 1994, brought about a ceasefire 2 days later, and UNAVEM 3 was implemented in February 1995. Its mandate ended in 1997, and it was replaced by the United Nations Observer Mission in Angola, MONUA, until February 1999. After Spain withdrew from the Western Sahara in 1976, Morocco was given 2/3 of the territory and Mauritania 1/3. That year, a popular front, Polisario, declared independence as the Saharan Arab Democratic Republic, SADR, with support from Algeria, Libya, and Cuba, and began fighting Mauritania, which relinquished its territory in the Algiers Agreement of August 1979. But Morocco then annexed that territory. That year, the Organization of African Unity, OAU, called for a ceasefire and a referendum in the Western Sahara, establishing a committee to work with the United Nations. When the OAU ceded the SADR in 1985, Morocco resigned in protest. Libya supported Morocco, and in October 1985, SADR's Foreign Minister Hassan declared a unilateral ceasefire. On August 11, 1988, UN Secretary-General Pérez de Cuellar suggested a joint UN-OAU plan for a ceasefire and a referendum conducted by the UN. Representatives of Morocco and Polisario agreed. Diplomatic relations improved, and by February 1989, the region founded the Arab Maghreb Union, modeled after Europe's common market. However, talks made little progress, though King Hassan declared a universal truce when the Secretary-General visited in February 1990. The United Nations Mission for the Referendum in Western Sahara, MINURSO, was established on April 29, 1991, and a ceasefire went into effect on September 6. However, the referendum was delayed, and the MINURSO mandate had to be extended several times and is still in effect. Chad and Libya submitted a border dispute to the International Court of Justice in September 1990, and in the spring of 1994, the United Nations Azu Strip Observer Group, UNASOG, monitored Libya's withdrawal. Somalia became independent of Italy and Britain in 1960, but began fighting with Ethiopia and was taken over by the Soviet-trained army led by General Siad Barre in October 1969. Ethiopia's Emperor Haile Selassie was deposed in 1975, and the Soviet Union and Cuba provided military aid to the new government. In 1991, General Aidid toppled President Siad Barre. So much fighting occurred that in 1992, more than 4 million people were threatened by starvation, and about 300,000 died. In February, UN Secretary-General Boutros Ghali sponsored talks between General Aidid and his rival Ali Mahdi, and they agreed to a ceasefire on March 3rd. The United Nations operation in Somalia, UNOSOM, was deployed to monitor the ceasefire in July. In December 1992, the UN Security Council authorized states to provide military forces to secure the delivery of humanitarian aid, and in 1993, the Council expanded the force, implementing UNOSOM II. On March 24, 1994, Ali Mahdi and General Aidid signed a Declaration of National Reconciliation, agreeing to a ceasefire and voluntary disarmament. Although some district and regional courts were established, after a while it was determined that the UN presence was no longer aiding national reconciliation. UNOSOM was completely withdrawn by March 2, 1995. After 2 years of fighting over the border, mediation by Algeria and the Organization of African Unity, OAU, helped Ethiopia and Eritrea sign an agreement in June 2000 to cease hostilities. In July, the UN Security Council set up the United Nations mission in Ethiopia and Eritrea, UNMEE, to be a liaison and to verify the ceasefire. In September, the Council authorized deployment of military personnel to monitor the peace and the redeployment of troops, and to assist in ensuring observance of security and the temporary security zone, and it is still in operation. The United Nations Observer Mission Uganda-Rwanda, UNOMUR, began in August 1993, and this led 2 months later to the creation of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Rwanda, UNAMIR. After an airplane crash killed the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi on April 6, 1994, a civil war turned into mass murder as Hutus killed between 500,000 and 1 million Tutsis, and moderate Hutus in one of the worst cases of genocide in history. 10 Belgian UN peacekeepers were killed trying to protect Prime Minister Agathe Uwilingiyimana. Amid the civil war, Belgium decided to withdraw its battalion from UNAMIR. On April 30th, the UN Security Council demanded that the interim group of Rwanda and the Rwandese Patriotic Front, RPF, prevent attacks on civilians. On May 13th, UN Secretary-General Boutros-Ghali suggested adding 5,500 troops to UNAMIR. And 4 days later, the UN Security Council imposed an arms embargo on Rwanda, expanding UNAMIR's mandate. On July 14th, the Security Council demanded an immediate ceasefire. After the RPF took Gisenyi on July 17th, they declared a unilateral ceasefire the next day. On July 19th, the broad-based government of national unity formed and began controlling all of Rwanda. UNAMIR helped refugees to return safely and ended its mission in March 1996. A civil war began in Liberia in 1989 that led to the death of more than 100,000 civilians, making 700,000 refugees. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, created the ECOWAS Monitoring Group, ECOMOG, in 1990, with 4,000 troops from Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. On November 19, 1992, the UN Security Council imposed an arms embargo on deliveries to Liberia, except for those going to the peacekeeping forces of ECOWAS. The Cotonou Peace Agreement was signed on July 25, 1993, and in September, the UN Security Council established the United Nations Observer Mission in Liberia, UNOMIL, to cooperate with ECOWAS in implementing the Cotonou Agreement. UNOMIL helped ECOWAS and the OAU monitor elections in Liberia and ended its mission in September 1997. In the multi-party elections, Charles Taylor was elected president of Liberia, but several factions were not absorbed into the security forces. In May 2003, President Taylor agreed to a joint assessment mission by the United Nations, African Union, and ECOWAS. By then, 2 rebel movements controlled nearly 2/3 of Liberia, and they decided the hostilities were not conducive to holding elections in October. A ceasefire agreement was signed on June 17th, and in July, ECOWAS leaders decided to send a vanguard force to facilitate Taylor's handing over of power, and the United States positioned a military force off the coast. On August 1st, the UN Security Council authorized a multinational force in Liberia that began 3 days later with the ECOWAS mission in Liberia, ECOMIL. The United Nations mission in Liberia, UNMIL, was established by the Security Council in September 2003 to support the implementation of the ceasefire agreement and the peace process, and its mission continues. After mutinies in the army of the Central African Republic, in January 1997, 4 African presidents mediated a truce as parties signed the Bangui Agreements. An Inter-African Force, MISAB, was deployed to monitor implementation. The United Nations mission in the Central African Republic, MINURCA, helped maintain security and monitor the disarmament, restructuring of the national police, and election plans, ending its mission in February 2000. In May 1997, a military coup overthrew the democratically elected government in Sierra Leone. But the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and its peacekeeping force restored the elected government in March 1998. The United Nations Observer Mission in Sierra Leone, UNO-MSIL, was established to monitor the military situation, disarmament, and demobilization. In October 1999, it was replaced as a UN Security Council established the United Nations Mission in Sierra Leone, UNA-MSIL, to help implement the peace plan and assist the government with disarmament, demobilization, and law and order. Also in 1999, 6 regional states and 2 Congolese rebel movements signed a ceasefire agreement to stop hostilities between the belligerent forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The United Nations Organization Mission in Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUC, was established to be a liaison between the parties. In February 2000, MONUC began monitoring the implementation of the ceasefire and prepared an action plan to implement the agreement and verify disengagement and the redeployment of the parties' forces. MONUC is still in the Congo. In May 2004, the United Nations operation in Burundi, ONUB, was authorized to support the Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement for Burundi that had been signed at Arusha on 28 August 2000. Parties in the Ivory Coast region signed a peace agreement in January 2003, and the UN Security Council set up the United Nations Mission in Côte d'Ivoire, MINUCI, in May 2003. This was replaced by the United Nations operation in Côte d'Ivoire, UNOCI, in April 2004. The government of Sudan and the Sudan People's Liberation Movement Army signed the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in January 2005, and on March 24th, the UN Security Council decided to establish the United Nations Mission in the Sudan, UNMIS, to support its implementation. After 4 factions signed the agreements on a comprehensive political settlement of the Cambodia conflict on October 23, 1991, in Paris, the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, UNTAC, helped to disarm and demobilize the armed forces, promote human rights, repatriate refugees, supervise elections, clear mines, and generally rehabilitate the country. Although the Party of Democratic Kampuchea, PDK, did not participate in the elections in late 1992 and early 1993, they were considered successful. After the new constitution was adopted on September 21, 1993, UNTAC ended its mandate. On August 2, 1990, the Iraqi army invaded Kuwait, and the same day, the UN Security Council condemned it and demanded that Iraq withdraw unconditionally. After 10 more similar resolutions that added naval and air embargoes, the Security Council passed Resolution 678 on November 29th, warning that if Iraq did not implement the resolutions by January 15, 1991, member states would be authorized to use all necessary means to uphold and implement the resolutions and restore peace in the region. On January 16th, a coalition of forces led by the United States launched air attacks on Iraq. Ground forces moved into southern Iraq and Kuwait on February 24th and soon captured Iraqi forces remaining there. The U.S. decision to stop the ground war after 100 hours allowed divisions of the Iraqi Republican Guard to escape to northern Iraq, where they later suppressed rebellions by the Shia and Kurdish majority, causing refugees to flee toward Turkey and Iran. On April 3rd, the Security Council passed Resolution 687, detailing the terms of the ceasefire that Iraq accepted 3 days later. The United Nations Iraq-Kuwait Observer Mission, UNIKOM, was established to deter boundary violations and for surveillance of the demilitarized zone. Resolution 687 also created the following: the United Nations Special Commission to oversee the destruction, removal, or rendering harmless of all Iraq's chemical and biological weapons and related capabilities and facilities, and its ballistic missiles with a range greater than 150 kilometers. The Commission also assisted the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, in the destruction, removal, or rendering harmless as appropriate of Iraq's nuclear capabilities. UNIKOM became operational as the last U.S. Army unit left Iraq on May 7, 1991. On December 16, 1990, Jean-Bertrand Aristide was elected president of Haiti with 2/3 of the vote. On September 30, 1991, he was forced into exile by a coup d'etat led by Lieutenant General Raoul Cedras of the High Command of the Haitian Armed Forces, FADH. The UN General Assembly condemned this and the violation of human rights in Haiti in a resolution on October 11th. Acting under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter on June 16, 1993, the Security Council imposed an oil and arms embargo against Haiti. A month later, a pact was signed in New York to guarantee a peaceful transition, and on August 25th, the Haitian Parliament ratified Aristide's appointment of Robert Malval as designated Prime Minister. A month after that, the Security Council authorized the United Nations mission in Haiti, UNMIH. Non-compliance by FADH resulted in Secretary General Boutros-Ghali reimposing the sanctions in October. On July 31, 1994, the UN Security Council authorized member states to form a multinational force to remove the military leadership and restore Haiti's elected president. In a final diplomatic effort, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter led a delegation that got the Haitian military to cooperate with a military mission led by the United States, and on September 19th, the 28-nation multinational force entered Haiti without opposition. 10 days later, the UN Security Council authorized the Secretary General to send in the UNMIH advance team. Lieutenant General Cedras resigned on October 10th, and 5 days later, President Aristide returned to Haiti. UNMIH helped support professionalization of the national police and ended its mission in June 1996. The UN Security Council established the United Nations Support Mission in Haiti, UNSMIH, in June 1996 to help train police. After being extended, the mission was ended in July 1997. For the next 4 months, the United Nations Transition Mission in Haiti, UNTMIH, bridged the gap until it was replaced by the United Nations Civilian Police Mission in Haiti, MIPONUH, which completed its mandate in March 2000. On February 29, 2004, United States forces abducted and removed President Jean-Bertrand Aristide from Haiti. Believing that Aristide had resigned, a few hours later the UN Security Council authorized the Multinational Interim Force, MIF. The United States and France blocked the UN Security Council or the 15-member Caribbean Community, CARCOM, from investigating the abduction of Aristide, which international law professor Francis Boyle called a violation of the United Nations Charter. The UN Security Council transferred authority from MIF to the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti, MINUSTAH, on April 30, 2004, and in November renewed it for 2005. After Abkhaz separatists began fighting the government of Georgia in 1992, the United Nations Observer Mission in Georgia, UNOMIG, was established to verify a ceasefire in 1993. In May 1994, the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, deployed a peacekeeping force in Georgia, and an expanded UNOMIG still observes their operation. The United Nations offered its good offices to help resolve a civil war in Tajikistan in 1992, and starting in December 1994, the United Nations Mission of Observers in Tajikistan, UNMOT, began monitoring a ceasefire and the deployed peacekeeping force of the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS. A peace agreement was signed in June 1997, and UNMOT helped implement it before pulling out in May 2000. After turmoil in Yugoslavia in the 1980s, popular referenda in Croatia and Slovenia led to their declaring independence in June 1991. That month, Serbs living in Croatia began fighting with support from the Yugoslav People's Army, JNA, though in Slovenia the JNA withdrew after the European Community mediated an agreement. On September 25th, the UN Security Council called upon all states to implement a complete embargo on all weapons to Yugoslavia and commended the efforts of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, CSCE. In February 1992, the UN Security Council established the United Nations Protection Force, UNPRO-FRO. On May 22nd, the General Assembly admitted into the United Nations the Republic of Slovenia, the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the Republic of Croatia. On May 30th, the Security Council invoked Chapter 7 of the UN Charter to impose sanctions on the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Serbia and Montenegro, in order to stimulate peaceful settlement of conflicts. In 1993, U.S. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance and European Community mediator Lord Owen proposed a peace plan through the International Conference on the Former Yugoslavia, ICFY. And in 1994, Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina formed the Bosniak-Croat Federation as territory was divided between these groups and the Bosnian Serbs. The United Nations Confidence Restoration Operation in Croatia, UNCRO, helped implement a ceasefire and demilitarization in the Prevlaka Peninsula. Croatia used force to reintegrate Western Slavonia and Krajina from May to August 1995 as the UN withdrew from those areas. On October 5, 1995, the United States secured a ceasefire of the fighting that was raging in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and on November 22nd, the UN Security Council suspended the sanctions against Yugoslavia. UNCRO ended its mission in January 1996. That month, the United Nations Transitional Administration for Eastern Slavonia, Baranja, and Western Sirmium, UNTAES, oversaw the basic agreement of November 1995 that provided for the peaceful integration of Croatia, supervising demilitarization, voluntary return of refugees, and the April 1997 elections. The United Nations Preventive Deployment Force, UNPREDEP, replaced UNPRO-FOR in March 1995 in Macedonia, and monitored the borders between Yugoslavia and Albania until February 1999. As the international force, IFOR, led by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was deployed, the United Nations mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, UNMIBH, helped implement the General Framework Agreement by coordinating humanitarian relief, demining human rights, elections, and rehabilitation of infrastructure. UNMIBH's Police Task Force continues to monitor law enforcement. In January 1996, the United Nations Mission of Observers in Prevlaka, UNMOP, took over from UNCRO the monitoring of the demilitarization of the Prevlaka Peninsula in southern Croatia on the border of Yugoslavia. After the United States and NATO took it upon themselves to bomb Yugoslavia in the spring of 1999 for its oppression of Kosovo, in June, the UN Security Council authorized NATO to lead a security presence, KFOR, to demilitarize Kosovo and maintain law and order. The United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, UNMIK, was established to operate as peacekeepers and to exercise administrative and executive authority, administering justice, rehabilitating the territory, and preparing Kosovo for elections as an autonomous province within the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. In August 1999, the United Nations conducted a poll in which East Timorese chose to separate from Indonesia, but anti-independence forces reacted with a campaign of terror. The UN Security Council authorized an international force, INTERFET, to restore order and in October established the United Nations Transitional Administration in East Timor, UNTAET, to help the East Timorese to become independent, administer the territory, organize elections, and assure the rule of law and human rights. On May 20, 2002, East Timor became an independent nation with the name Timor-Leste, and UNTAET was replaced by the United Nations Mission of Support in East Timor, UNMISET, to provide assistance to the newly elected Timor-Leste government for 3 years. The United Nations has difficulty keeping states in line against their will, but the veto has at least kept the superpowers talking together in the Security Council, even though they were not always able to agree. The General Assembly became a great public forum for the debate of international issues, and the developments of the economic and social functions made progress in dealing with many of the root causes of war. In 1992, the new Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali wrote Agenda for Peace and suggested that the United Nations become more active in peacekeeping, peacemaking, and what he called peace building. With the Cold War over, this has meant the use of many more military forces, especially by the United States. In 1992, there were about 12,000 military and police personnel functioning as UN peacekeepers, but by the end of 1994, the number had increased to nearly 80,000, not counting the 10,000 U.S. troops in Haiti. In 2004, United Nations peace operations rotated 120,000 military and civilian police personnel. In 2005, United Nations Peacekeeping was spending an annual budget of $5 billion for operations, with about 67,000 military personnel and civilian police. The United Nations is far from perfect and complete as a world organization, but it has enabled humanity to make many important steps on the path of social evolution.